So before we can come to the full assessment of Xi Jinping's political changes, I think it's worthwhile to talk to you also about China before Xi Jinping and to give you a glimpse of what has happened during that period. And so let's kick off this section by two interesting examples, and also they pose actually interesting contrast. So the first one, I think until today, we might have two different perceptions of China, at least before Xi Jinping came to power. So the first one is the helmsman model. So what does that mean? I mean, let me give you one good example. This is taken from actually a congressional research from American Congress, and the director back then in 2005 was Anna Cohen. And so she used to write this piece, so China's energy strategy, a lesson for the United States. And so let's read this very short paragraph here. So she said here, so whether or not you like the implications for the United States, China has developed a comprehensive energy strategy that addresses both supply and demand, unlike the president's energy plan and the one before the Congressional Energy Conference Committee this week. So you can very easily sense that in Anna Cohen's mind, China presents a very different model from the United States. In the U.S., it's a democracy, and it has a very complicated political process and lots of different interest groups in the Congress. And therefore, you have to go through a very complicated and complex negotiation process for something to be done. But in China, according to her impression, they have developed a comprehensive energy strategy, and obviously imply that that's because the leadership back there has the power to decide everything. That's helmsman model. So in other words, the political leader in China is just like a helmsman. But second, almost like in the same year, the Eurasia Group, a very famous think tank in the United States, also published a piece, and the title is China's Overseas Investment in Oil and Gas Production. And this book was published in 2006. So it's almost like, just a year or a couple months after Anna Cohen's piece was published. And this paragraph here actually features the bottling model and presents a very different picture of China's political economy. So let's also read this quickly. So while recent reforms to China's energy regulation structure will undoubtedly change the dynamics of bureaucratic decision-making, top-level attention to energy issues has not helped the government to overcome turf wars between different ministries, and China's domestic energy reform, such as liberalizing pricing, remains bogged down by political sensitivities. So if you read this paragraph without knowing it's China, and contrast this to another paragraph we just read to you, you probably think these are two different countries, but actually it's not. I mean, these are two publications. They were published almost in the same period, and they are talking about the same thing. In other words, China's energy policy or policy regime. Nonetheless, they came to very different conclusions. So I think these are two, very good examples to show you. For a while, when we try to understand China's political economy, people are struggling to understand which one exactly is a real picture of China's. And I think for today, I think I can tell you, before Xi Jinping, the bottling model actually was more the case. But after Xi Jinping came to power, it seems that he is driving China's model towards the helmsman model. So let's get into the detail. So this is, again, a very interesting paragraph from another famous book, even though it's a little bit old. So this is a book published by two famous political scientists, Lieberthal and Oxenberg. They were both the professors at Michigan back then, and they published this book titled Bureaucracy, Politics, and Decision-Making in Post-Mao China. So this is actually, I think they spent a couple of months in China, inside different ministries to study the decision-making in China. And they came to the conclusion that it's actually quite fragmented. So this term, fragmented authoritarianism, has been for a long time the major heuristic for scholars to understand China. And that's also, stop here for a while to understand what exactly they meant by fragmented authoritarianism. So they come up with this kind of module for understanding Chinese decision making. So here they said, so policy X, it could be anything, resulted from a bargaining among ministries A, B, and C. And sometimes province D can also play a role, because in China, of course, we know that all these ministries can be very powerful, but also different provinces might also play a role, and especially when those policies might affect the benefits of their provinces. And therefore, when a policy is discussed inside a system among these different actors, they first of all might be brokered by one or more top leaders. So in other words, it's still an authoritarian country, and therefore top leaders there obviously will play a role. And so the policies might be brokered by them. But then they're arranged by coordinating steps acting in the name of one or more top leaders, or they might be negotiated by the super industry coordinating agency. And next, and then after they have been negotiated among these top leaders, and they have to ratified through routine procedures by the top leaders as well. And then, as you can imagine, disgruntled ministries E, F, and losers in the deal might plan to pursue strategy to erode the agreement, and the bargaining sought to reconcile the conflicting organizational missions, ethos, structure, and resource allocation of the ministries involved. So this is, again, a paragraph taken from their book, and it actually gives us a vivid picture of how a policy is negotiated inside a system. So there are a couple of features that we have to know from here. So first of all, of course, it's an authoritarian country, and therefore power is concentrated in the hands of a few people. But the thing is, it's not, at least before Xi Jinping came to power, the policy-making process obviously was not like what Anna Cohen had in mind. So even though, of course, they can have something that is very comprehensive, but doesn't mean it is totally determined by one man or just a few people. It also has to go through a very complicated process, and that's why it's called fragmented authoritarianism, because the fragmentation is the very important feature of this system. And next, the second feature we also have to know is that the bargaining can come from very different levels, and especially in China, even though the policies are determined at a center, but actually the local provincial leaders, they might also play a role, and that's because I'm going to give you more details in a bit, but you also have to remember some of the provincial party secretaries, they are members of the Politburo or even the standing committee of the Politburo. In other words, even though you are from one of the local provinces, you might still have some influence in a central decision-making process. So this is, again, the political system China had before Xi Jinping came to power, but that's also not to forget. Just a couple of minutes ago, we mentioned that authoritarian institutions to share power among elites, and also the cooptation institutions to co-opt social elites. These are important institutional foundations for China's economic growth to happen, to take place. And therefore, these institutions, while it might seem a little bit chaotic or complicated, but as a matter of fact, this is a very important symbol for us to see. Actually, these elites, they cooperate, and they bargain for their best interest. And also, this is also evidence for the power sharing that is happening in China that was happening before Xi Jinping came to power in 2012. And to be more specific, in China, there are a couple of authoritarian institutions. We just mentioned that the CCP is one of them, and the People's Congress, and also the Political Consultative Meeting. So in other words, the kind of policymaking process, they have to go through all these different institutions, and in the process, different interests can have their own share in a policy. And in other words, this is a process for creating, not to create not to create losers. So everyone can be a winner in this process. And also, to be more specific, inside the CCP, we also have to understand that it's like a pyramid. So this is a very simple way to visualize China's political pyramid, and also the reciprocal accountability created, thus. So that's also spend some time here. So on the very top of the pyramid is the Standing Committee of the Politburo. Well, it's composed of 7 people today, but it used to be 9. And then these are probably the most powerful 9 or 7 people in Chinese politics. And these people are actually chosen by the entire, from the entire Politburo. And that's because in the Politburo, they also have non-standing members. So in other words, in entirety, the Politburo is composed about 25 people, and 7 or 9 out of them would be the standing members. And again, on the very bottom, you see the Central Committee. So that's because all these members in the Politburo at the same time have to be the members of the Central Committee. So, and also, they are chosen, they are elected from the Central Committee. So this structure, as a matter of fact, creates 2 different directions of accountability. The first one is political accountability, because Politburo Standing Committee members, they're chosen by the Politburo members, and then the Politburo members, again, they are chosen by the Central Committee members. And therefore, it creates a necessity for the Politburo members to share power and resources with people who selected them to be the members in the Politburo. And on the other hand, the reason why it is reciprocal is that, bureaucratically speaking, the Politburo Standing Committee, they stand on the very top of this system, and therefore, all the people down below have to be held accountable to them, and as bureaucrats, because as you might notice in a bit, if you take a look at all the ministers in China, they all have to be members of the Central Committee, and some of them will be the members of the Politburo, but not all of them. So, in other words, there is another direction. The Central Committee members, when they are ministers of those ministries, they will have to be responsible for the jobs they were given by Politburo members, and that's why you have this bureaucratic accountability. And so, in the Chinese political system, even though it is still the case today, but what I have to say is that, as we're going to see in a bit, Xi Jinping actually has changed a lot inside the system, and therefore, while the structure remains intact, but the substance or the rules and logics of operation inside the system now is actually quite different. And so, again, I just mentioned that if this is a model for power sharing and cooptation in China, and as we mentioned previously, from a broader literature, political scientists have helped us understand, with the presence of these different institutions, for power sharing and social cooptation, these countries having them might be able to achieve, higher economic growth rates and might actually survive longer. And here are some evidence. So first one is there's a actually pretty famous theory from Professor Chen. He's a economics professor at Berkeley and also the dean at Tsinghua School of Economics and Management. And he used to create this interesting term called the market-preserving federalism. And so basically what he meant through this paper and a series of books is that China, of course, is not a real federal state. It's a unitary state. But federalism, which means that there are some in China, which means that there are de facto power sharing between the center and other local units, either province or counties or cities. This means that there's a de facto federalism in China. And the creation of such a market-preserving federalism actually help Chinese dictators to solve the commitment problem. But let me also spend just probably a couple, maybe 30 seconds to explain to you what commitment problem is. And the commitment problem arises when a dictator has a lot of power for controlling and punishing people who don't listen to their orders. So the more powerful they are, the less likely they are able to commit to any promises. And the reason is, while dictators can use their force or coercion to make people obey their orders, but the thing is, that also means that they cannot commit to anything in the future simply because they are so powerful. If they make a promise to share resources with other elites next year or the year after next year, they can, dictators can actually take those promises back in a minute, and you cannot do anything about it because they're so powerful. And so the paradox here is that even though they're powerful in coercing people to do something, that doesn't mean they actually have less power to promise people. So, but the market preserving federalism, because it places some limits on the power, and especially they have to share power with local units. And therefore, they maybe not entirely solve the problem, but they actually help mitigate the commitment problem. And next, found that party institutionalization in China and the informational transparency because of this institutionalization actually help China overcome commitment problem. And also, what's more important, it creates an environment for China to attract foreign investments. And another important concept here is that they especially focus on the effect of institutions on how elites can overcome their collective actions. And the reason is, as I mentioned at the very beginning, no dictator can rule the country alone, and they all need the cooperation from the elites. But the problem is, if they now have become dictators, how can they keep the promise, right? As I just mentioned in the first point, how can they keep the promise? And one of the important findings from their paper is that these institutions actually make information more transparent, and therefore allow elites to coordinate much more easily, and therefore create an expectation on the dictator's side. Once the dictator wants to renege on their previous promises, the elites will be able to get organized and punish you. And therefore, from a game theoretical perspective, this makes the dictator less willing to violate their initial promise. And therefore, this creates the important condition for the investments and growth to happen in China. And of course, there are also skeptic voices in the literature. And one of the most famous skeptic voices is S. Malcolm Robinson in their book, Why Nation Fails, published in 2012. So for them, the Chinese growth is not sustainable since they think it's based on extractive rather than inclusive institutions. So here, what I want to emphasize here is that from the first two papers, we see the evidence that because of the authoritarian institutions that existed in China before Xi Jingping came to power, and therefore what happened at the same time was that China can enjoy this phenomenal economic growth rates almost over a decade. But for as Malcolm Robinson, they pose a much more fundamental question. This growth for them is based on extractive and not exclusive institutions, and therefore it's not sustainable. But maybe we don't have to settle the debate today. But what is clear, however, is that the institutional foundation that Deng Xiaoping helped establish since late 1970s obviously was very critical to the Chinese success. And therefore, one of the biggest questions we can ask for today's China is that, is the foundation still robust? And that's when we can turn the page to Xi Jinping's era.